On the morning of April 20th, 1990, in Eagan, Minnesota, a quiet suburban neighborhood was about to be shaken by a mystery that would haunt it for decades. 17-year-old Christopher Kerze stayed home from school, telling his parents he had a headache. At first, it was nothing unusual, a teenager feeling under the weather, a mother going about her daily routine. But by the time she returned home that afternoon, Christopher was gone. In his place, a note that read, "Mom, something important came up. If I don't come back, and if I get lost, know that I love you." The word lost was underlined twice. That chilling detail, simple yet ominous, would become the last confirmed trace of Christopher Kerze. His car would later be found abandoned near Duluth, hundreds of miles from his home. Inside, no sign of a struggle, no answers, only questions. Was this the carefully planned escape of a teenager overwhelmed by something no one else could see? Or the first step in a tragedy too dark to imagine? 35 years later, Christopher's disappearance remains one of Minnesota's most unsettling unsolved cases. No body, no suspects, no closure. Only a family still waiting for answers, and a community still haunted by a single underlined word: lost. Christopher Kerze was, in many ways, the kind of teenager you wouldn't expect to simply vanish. Born in 1973, he grew up in the suburban safety of Eagan, Minnesota, an upper-middle-class community where families believed the streets were safe and the future was secure. He was the youngest of 3 siblings, described by those who knew him as intelligent, quiet, and introspective. Friends said Christopher was thoughtful, with a sharp mind and a sensitive nature. He played piano, had strong grades, and seemed destined for college. Teachers remembered him as respectful, if sometimes reserved, more likely to be lost in thought than in trouble. His classmates later said that he wasn't a kid who stood out for rebellion or risk. Instead, he was more of an observer, the type of person who thought deeply before he spoke. At home, Christopher's relationship with his family seemed stable. His parents, David and Patricia, were loving and involved, and although no family is without its struggles, there were no glaring signs that Christopher was planning something drastic. His mother would later describe him as sensitive, someone who carried emotions quietly but intensely. Yet, like many teenagers, Christopher had layers that weren't always visible on the surface. He wasn't a stereotypical runaway, nor was he someone involved in criminal activity. That contrast between the boy people knew and the young man who left behind such an ominous note is what makes his story so haunting. When investigators began piecing together the days leading up to April 20th, they found no clear warning signs. No fights at home, no sudden changes in behavior, no confessions to friends. Instead, they were left with the portrait of a bright, talented young man whose disappearance seemed to come out of nowhere. And yet, when you look closer, there are shadows in Christopher's story, hints of private struggles, of pressures no one else fully understood. Pressures that might explain why a teenager would stay home from school one morning, sit down at his desk, and write a note that hinted at both love and farewell. April 20th, 1990, began like any other day in Eagan, Minnesota. Spring was just settling in, the air cool but hinting at warmth. For most families, it was just another school day. But for Christopher Kerze, that morning carried a quiet weight that no one else around him could see. He told his parents he had a headache and would stay home from school. It wasn't unusual. Teenagers get sick days, and nothing about his explanation raised alarm. His mother left for work, expecting she'd see her son later that afternoon. But when she returned home, the house was still and unsettlingly empty. Christopher was gone. On his desk, she found a note. Its contents would haunt her for decades. "Mom, something important came up, and if I'm not back, I'm sorry. Don't worry, I'll be all right. I'll be back later if I don't get lost." The word lost was underlined twice. For a parent, those words were chilling. They carried no details, no clear direction, just an ambiguous farewell that read like a mixture of reassurance and warning. At first, his family may have hoped it was just a typical teenage escape, maybe a trip with friends, maybe a walk to clear his head. But as the hours turned into a night, and then into the next day, that fragile hope began to fade. Investigators later confirmed that Christopher had taken the family car, a blue 1988 Dodge Caravan. The minivan was found abandoned on a rural road in Itasca County, nearly 3 hours north of Eagan. It was discovered the very next day, April 21st, by a passerby. The car was locked. Inside were Christopher's wallet and ID. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of Christopher, just an empty vehicle, sitting quietly in the woods. The distance was baffling. Why would a 17-year-old, with no known ties to that area, drive hundreds of miles only to vanish? The discovery marked the beginning of a mystery that has lasted more than 3 decades. And the note, ambiguous, cryptic, even poetic, remained the only direct clue to his state of mind. Was it goodbye, a coded message, or just the words of a teenager struggling to express feelings he didn't want to say out loud? That day, April 20th, was the last time Christopher Kerze was ever seen. When Christopher's Dodge Caravan was found abandoned on that remote road in Itasca County, the search for him shifted from routine worry to something far more urgent. Police quickly secured the vehicle and began canvassing the area, but the woods surrounding the road stretched endlessly, making every search feel like a drop in an ocean. Inside the van, detectives noted the wallet and ID left behind, an unusual choice for a teenager who had seemingly gone off on his own. If Christopher intended to start a new life, why leave behind the essentials? If he intended to come back, why drive so far north and then disappear? The contradiction gnawed at investigators. His family launched their own efforts, reaching out to neighbors, classmates, and friends. Flyers with Christopher's photo began circulating around town, and local media picked up the story of the missing Eagan teenager. His high school was shaken. Classmates recalled him as intelligent, thoughtful, and somewhat reserved, but never someone they thought would just vanish. Early theories began to form. One was that Christopher may have run away. After all, the note implied he was leaving intentionally. But detectives were uneasy with that explanation. Runaways usually take money, clothes, or at least a plan. Christopher had taken none of these. His wallet sat in the van untouched. His bank account remained dormant. His friends insisted he had made no mention of wanting to leave. Another theory leaned darker, that he may have harmed himself. The underlined word lost hinted at despair, and the remote road where his car was found suggested someone who wanted to disappear from the world. Search dogs were brought in to comb the surrounding area, but no scent trails, clothing, or personal effects turned up for investigators. It was as though Christopher had stepped out of his van and dissolved into thin air. His parents, devastated but determined, refused to give up hope. They worked tirelessly with the police, fielded calls from strangers who claimed to have seen him, and followed up on rumors from as far away as California. Every lead, though, led to another dead end. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the community. Some speculated he had been abducted. Others believed he might have been caught up in something bigger than anyone realized. But with no evidence of foul play, detectives could only keep the case open and hope that time, or a witness, would bring answers. In those early days, the investigation was marked by confusion, contradiction, and the overwhelming sense that something about Christopher's disappearance did not fit neatly into any category of missing person cases. He wasn't the typical runaway. He wasn't the typical victim of crime. He wasn't the typical suicide case. He was just gone. As the weeks turned into months, the disappearance of Christopher Kerze began to draw wider attention. Local news stations covered updates whenever police organized search efforts or when a family issued pleas for information. His photograph, bright-eyed, youthful, wearing the earnest look of a teenager just stepping into adulthood, became a familiar face on flyers posted in gas stations, libraries, and schools across Minnesota. But with each passing day, the silence grew heavier. No new evidence surfaced. No calls from Christopher. No credible sightings. For the Kerze family, the absence was unbearable. His parents and siblings lived in the space between hope and grief, desperately clinging to the idea that he might still come home, while slowly acknowledging the dark possibility that he might not. The media helped keep his story alive, but even that waned as time went on. Reporters revisited the case on anniversaries. 1 year later, 5 years later, 10 years later. But the segments were short, usually ending with the same unresolved conclusion. Christopher Kerze was still missing. The lack of closure created an open wound for his family and community. Unlike other tragedies where the cause is clear, a missing person case drags on endlessly. Without answers, the human mind fills the void with possibility. Did he run away and start a new life? Did he meet someone that day who lured him into danger? Was he the victim of a random act of violence? Or, as the haunting note implied, had he gone into the wilderness to take his own life? The van remained a central focus in discussions. Why drive that far? Why leave it on a remote road? It was as though the vehicle was both clue and symbol, evidence of intent, yet also a dead end. Investigators scoured surrounding trails and waterways, but nothing tied to Christopher was ever found. His parents gave interviews, their voices breaking as they described the agony of waking each morning not knowing where their son was. They begged the public to come forward with even the smallest piece of information. The case became not only an investigation but a community vigil. Everyone in Eagan seemed to be waiting for Christopher to walk back through the door. And yet, as years passed, the silence deepened. Leads dried up. Detectives moved on to other cases. The file grew thicker with reports, but thinner with hope. The Kerze family continued to set a place for him at the table on special occasions, quietly preserving the memory of a son who had vanished into the shadows of 1990. The haunting silence surrounding Christopher's disappearance became the very thing that defined it. Not just a mystery, but an echo, a void, a story frozen in time. When a young person disappears, investigators often begin with the most straightforward explanations. Did he run away? Was this a planned escape from the pressures of teenage life? Christopher was a smart, thoughtful young man, and like many teens, he sometimes carried the quiet weight of expectation. School, college, the future. Could the note he left behind, with its haunting line about getting lost, have been a poetic way of saying goodbye? The runaway theory was plausible to some. After all, he had access to the family car, and he drove it far from home. But what gave investigators pause was that he took no clothes, no money, no identification, no survival gear. If he had planned a long-term disappearance, why leave without the essentials? And why abandon the car on a lonely road? For those who believed he simply wanted to start over, the practical details didn't add up. The second theory was darker, that Christopher had intended to take his own life. The note seemed to imply despair or at least a farewell. Suicide was a painful but unavoidable possibility in the minds of investigators and his family. Search teams combed the area surrounding his abandoned car, expecting perhaps to find remains or evidence of self-harm. Yet, despite exhaustive searches, nothing was ever recovered. Not a scrap of clothing, not a personal item, not a trace. For those who leaned towards suicide, the absence of evidence raised another question. If he had ended his life, how could there be no sign after all these years? Then there was a third, most chilling possibility: foul play. Some investigators and community members wondered, did Christopher encounter someone after leaving home? Did a stranger, or even someone he knew, lure him into danger? His car might have been abandoned not by him, but by whoever harmed him. The eerie note could have been a red herring, designed to make his disappearance look voluntary. In the absence of evidence, imagination fills the void, and foul play lingers as a terrifying explanation. Over the decades, these theories have shifted back and forth in public discussion. Some believe firmly that Christopher walked into the wilderness that day intending never to return. Others hold fast to the idea that he was taken against his will. For his family, the torment lies in not knowing. Every theory feels like a door half open, but never leading to the truth. And then in the decades that followed, the case entered another stage, one shaped by time, technology, and the hope that modern tools might succeed where 1990's investigation could not. As the days turned into months and the months into years, the search for Christopher Kerze entered that painful limbo known as a cold case. His parents, once filled with the urgency of a fresh disappearance, were forced into the quieter persistence of long-term waiting. Each anniversary of April 20th was another marker of time without answers, another reminder of a teenage boy who should have grown into adulthood but remained forever 17 in photographs and memories. The police files grew thicker over the years, filled with tips, interviews, and reports, but no breakthrough ever came. Periodically, sightings were reported. Someone thought they had seen Christopher in another state, or even another country. Each lead was checked, each glimmer of hope examined, and each one ended in disappointment. The runaway theory gained new life every time a sighting was called in, but a lack of verification always brought the Kerze family back to the same place: uncertainty. As the case aged, new generations of investigators inherited it. Detectives who were children themselves in 1990 later found themselves combing through the old files, hoping fresh eyes might see what their predecessors had missed. With the passage of time, technology became a crucial ally. DNA databases grew, missing person systems expanded, and forensic techniques advanced. Christopher's information was uploaded, cross-referenced, and monitored. But despite the advances, no definitive match, no conclusive discovery ever surfaced. For Christopher's family, the weight of decades has been almost unbearable. His parents, George and Mary, faced the impossible challenge of living their lives while never knowing what happened to their son. They pursued every lead, worked with missing persons organizations, and kept his memory alive through vigils, press coverage, and online efforts. They refused to let his story disappear into silence, even when the case seemed invisible to the wider world. And yet, time also carried its cruelties. As the years stretched on, the possibility of answers seemed to grow fainter. Witnesses aged, memories blurred, potential evidence degraded. The Kerze family grew older too, burdened with the knowledge that they might never see closure in their lifetimes. That torment of enduring decades without truth is something only families of the missing can truly understand. But even as the years passed, hope found small footholds. Cases once thought unsolvable were cracked open again by technology, persistence, or sheer chance. Families who had waited just as long sometimes saw the return of their loved ones' remains, or at least the revelation of the truth. For the Kerze family, each solved cold case was bittersweet. It meant answers were possible, even after decades, but also highlighted the absence of resolution in Christopher's story. The passage of time has not erased the mystery. Instead, it has deepened it, transforming Christopher Kerze's disappearance from a fresh investigation into a haunting legend of Minnesota's missing. Even after more than 3 decades, Christopher Kerze's disappearance continues to echo with unanswered questions. Each theory, revisited to the lens of time, still refuses to settle into certainty. The runaway theory remains tempting for some, largely because of Christopher's note, "I'll be back later if I don't get lost." The phrasing, particularly the underlined word lost, suggests both intention and ambiguity. Did Christopher mean lost physically, in the literal sense of not finding his way home, or was he speaking in metaphor, hinting at emotional turmoil, perhaps even suicidal thoughts? His car, later found abandoned near Duluth, seems to reinforce the possibility of a deliberate journey away from home. And yet, no trace of him, living or deceased, was ever located. No financial trail, no verifiable sightings, no communication. Could a 17-year-old truly disappear so completely if his intent was only to run? The suicide theory is another possibility. If Christopher had chosen to end his life in a remote area, his remains might never have been found. Minnesota and Wisconsin are filled with dense woods, deep lakes, and isolated areas where a body could go undiscovered indefinitely. The note, again, could be interpreted as a farewell. But those who knew him, family, friends, teachers, consistently emphasized that Christopher had shown no clear signs of such despair. Yes, he had complained of a headache that morning. Yes, adolescence can mask hidden struggles. But his loved ones insist he was not someone who appeared to be on the edge of such a decision. Then there's the foul play theory. Could Christopher have accepted a ride, met with the wrong person, or stumbled into danger while on his journey? His abandoned car raises chilling questions. Was it left voluntarily, or was it staged? Investigators have never been able to confirm either way. For a 17-year-old to vanish without even a whisper of communication, many believe, requires the intervention of someone else, someone who ensured that his voice was silenced. Over the decades, new theories have also emerged. Some wonder whether Christopher might have been a victim of human trafficking, or whether he encountered a serial predator operating in the region. During the late 80s and early 90s, the Midwest was not immune to such dangers. Serial offenders, from Jacob Wetterling's abductor to other unsolved cases, haunted the region. Could Christopher have crossed paths with one of them? The possibility lingers. And yet, in the absence of proof, the mystery endures. For every argument made in favor of one theory, there's a counterpoint that raises doubt. The note, the car, the silence, the total vanishing of a 17-year-old boy who should have had his whole life ahead of him. What remains certain is Christopher's legacy. His case has become one of Minnesota's most haunting cold cases, a story often revisited in true crime discussions, online forums, and missing persons databases. His name has not been forgotten. Families of the missing often live in fear of silence, of their loved one's memory fading from public consciousness. But the persistence of Christopher's story is proof that his disappearance still matters, not just to his family, but to a wider community seeking justice and answers. Christopher Kerze should have grown up, gone to college, found a career, perhaps built a family of his own. Instead, he remains frozen in time, a teenager from 1990, a photograph of a boy in glasses, remembered for his intelligence, his kindness, and his vanishing. His legacy is not just one of loss, but of enduring love. His parents never stopped searching. His community never fully let go. And now, decades later, his name continues to be spoken. The enduring mystery of Christopher Kerze is not simply about what happened that April morning in 1990. It is also about the questions that still ripple outward. Questions of how someone so young could disappear so completely. Questions of what it means to live with absence. Questions of how long hope can endure without answers. The truth remains hidden, but the story of Christopher Kerze lives on. Silence is the most haunting part of the Christopher Kerze case. Not the absence of evidence, but the absence of him, the voice that never returned, the laughter that never echoed to Kerze's home again, the presence that vanished on that April morning and never came back. For his parents, that silence became unbearable, a constant reminder that their son was gone and no one could tell them why. In the days after Christopher's disappearance, his family did what every desperate parent does. They searched, they pleaded, they hoped. They posted flyers, contacted the media, and retraced every possible path. They searched wooded areas, back roads, and stretches of land near where his car was found. But every effort seemed to collide with the same unyielding wall. Nothing. No belongings. No witnesses. No body. Just silence. The years that followed only deepened that wound. Holidays came and went. Birthdays passed without candles or cake. Each year brought another painful reminder. Christopher should have been here, but he wasn't, and the silence persisted. For his mother, the note left behind became both a torment and a lifeline. I'll be back later if I don't get lost. What did he mean? Was it a cry for help, a signal that he was struggling? Or was it meant literally, an innocent comment taken tragically out of context? Every time she read those words, she was left with more questions than answers. And yet, it was also the last trace of his voice, the last tangible link to her son's mind before he disappeared. The discovery of his car only deepened the mystery. Abandoned near Duluth, it stood as a silent witness, but revealed nothing. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle, no definitive clues about where Christopher had gone next. For investigators, the car was a dead end. For his family, it was a symbol of heartbreak. Proof that he had been there, but no indication of where he had gone. The FBI and Minnesota investigators revisited the case over the years. They checked tips, re-examined evidence, and even explored possible links to other cases. In 2004, renewed attention came after new investigative efforts, but again, no answers. In the 2010s, as technology advanced, the hope of DNA breakthroughs offered a glimmer of possibility, but Christopher's case yielded nothing concrete. Time marched on, but the silence remained. For the family, the silence was compounded by the whispers of theories. People speculated. He ran away. He took his own life. He was murdered. Each theory, no matter how well-meaning, was another cut, because behind every speculation was a son, a brother, a friend, who had been reduced to theories and possibilities, but who had once been alive, vibrant, and loved. And yet, through all of it, his family's love endured. They refused to let Christopher fade into obscurity. His mother spoke publicly about her son, sharing memories of his intelligence, his humor, and his gentle nature. She fought to keep his case alive in the public's memory, not just as a cold file in a drawer, but as a living, breathing person whose story demanded resolution. The reflection is clear. Christopher Kerze's case is more than just a mystery. It is a reminder of the devastating impact of unresolved loss. It shows us how a single disappearance can fracture a family, ripple through a community, and leave scars that time cannot heal. It teaches us that behind every missing person's case is not just evidence, but a heartbeat that has been silenced and loved ones who remain behind, waiting in the dark. The silence is heavy, but in that silence, Christopher's name still carries weight. His story endures because of the love that refuses to let him vanish completely. There are stories that end with justice, with verdicts delivered in courtrooms, with answers that bring closure, however painful. And then there are stories like that of Christopher Matthew Kerze, where the ending is silence, uncertainty, and the aching absence of truth. For more than 3 decades, his disappearance has stood as one of Minnesota's most enduring mysteries, a puzzle with missing pieces that no one has been able to put together. The so-called verdict, in this case, is not one handed down by a judge or jury. It is the one left to us. The haunting reality that sometimes, even with law enforcement, the FBI, and countless hours of searching, answers remain just out of reach. It is a verdict written not in court records, but in the hearts of family who still doesn't know what became of their son. Christopher's note, his abandoned car, and the empty space he left behind form the fragments of a story that has no resolution. Some believe he left on his own, seeking escape from pressures he could no longer bear. Others suspect foul play, that someone out there knows exactly what happened but has kept the secret buried. And still others hold a hope that one day, a tip, a DNA match, or a confession will finally illuminate the truth. But what lingers most is the humanity at the center of it all. A young man, just 17, with a promising future ahead of him. A family, torn apart by the sudden loss of a son and brother. A community, left to grapple with questions that may never be answered. The tragedy is not only that Christopher vanished, but that his story became defined by that disappearance, rather than the life he lived. And so, we leave his story where it has always been, unfinished. A reminder that behind every missing person is a life interrupted, a family waiting, and a mystery that continues to whisper across the years. The final reflection is this: silence is not closure. Time does not erase the pain of absence. And while Christopher's fate remains unknown, his story endures because it demands that we remember him. Not as a headline, not as a case number, but as a son, a student, and a human being whose disappearance has left a shadow over all who loved him. Until the day comes when the silence breaks, Christopher Kerze's case remains open, both in the files of investigators and in the hearts of those who continue to wait for the truth.